So first of all, I want to start with a little bit of a background and make sure everyone understands what the Orphan Well Association is. First of all, we're a not-for-profit organization. We operate under the delegated authority of the Alberta Energy Regulator. So what that means is that the regulator has certain powers within legislation to deal with sites where there's no longer an operator available. So what they do is they delegate those powers to us. So we have a lot of the same powers, but very prescribed powers. So even though we're a delegated authority of the energy regulator, we are financially and legally separate from the AER, and we're not a government organization. So that's one of the things that people obviously get confused. You say, oh, you work for the AER or you work for the provincial government. No, we're neither of those. Up until about 2 years ago, we did rent space from the AER, and so we were in their offices. So we had AER email addresses, we had AER phone numbers. If you came to talk to us, you had to go through AER security. So it makes sense that people would be confused about why we would maybe be part of the AER, but we're not. The other big one that we like to point out is that we are primarily funded by the Alberta oil and gas industry. So as we're a delegated authority, our powers come from legislation, our scope and mandate come from that as well. So the two big ones, first is the Orphan Fund Delegated Administration Regulation. The next one is the Oil and Gas Conservation Act. Also some components within RETA and APIA that follow our work. But basically everything that we can and can't do is listed in the legislation. From a government's perspective, we have 6 voting members on our boards of directors. So how our governance is set up is CAP is able to delegate 3 members on our board of directors. Those board members currently are Brad Harold, who's a VP at CAP, Boris Katelko with CNRL, and Kendall Dilling with Synovus. EPAC has 2 seats on our board of directors. So Blake Reed is going to be joining our board at our next meeting here at the beginning of December. And Jim Streeton with Corval is also on our board of directors. The Energy Regulator also has a seat on our board, and that's Rob Wadsworth, who's the VP of Closure and Liability. We also have a honorary non-voting member from Alberta Environment Parks on our board of directors with Karen Romkin. So our mandate, it's fairly straightforward and simple. It's to handle the decommissioning of oil and gas assets in Alberta and deal with reclamation of those associated sites. So what exactly is an orphan? I mean, a lot of people I talk to, especially in the media, they say they know what orphans are, but there's a couple of key points that they get wrong very often. Obviously, containing asset in the oil and gas industry, so well facility, pipeline, associated site. The big one, though, is that there can be no legally responsible, financially viable party associated with that asset. So it has to be 100% with a defunct company. If there's 0.1% of another company, it does not become an orphan. It stays with those other parties. So the other big thing that has to happen is it has to be designated as an orphan by the AER. So there's companies out there who are currently going through whether a receivership process or CCAA, or they might have actually put the keys on the table and walked away from their assets. Until the AER designates them as an orphan, they're not an orphan. What happens if it's less than 100%? So first and foremost, the property does not become an orphan. The AER deals with those other working interest participants to deal with the site. So again, no matter how small the working interest is, those other parties are responsible for doing the work. So those other WIPs involved in a site can either decommission and reclaim that site. They can also take that site on, they can transfer it to someone else. There's a whole bunch of options. If they end up doing the decommissioning and reclamation work, they can apply to the Orphan Well Association to receive that defunct company's portion of the costs will be reimbursed by the Orphan Well Association. So there's 2 points at which reimbursement can occur. One is after the decommissioning has been completed. The other one's after reclamation has been, there's been a certificate received. So I know that's one of the things we hear complaints about is that why can't you do it within different timelines? This is actually within the oil and gas conservation rules. So we can't actually do anything different. This is what the legislation says. These are the 2 timeframes. So this is something we have been talking about with the government about providing some more flexibility on this. We obviously understand that in financially tough times, carrying a whole bunch of these costs can be very burdensome, and we agree that we should be able to get that money back quickly. So this is where everyone sort of likes getting interested, is going through the inventory and how the problem is growing. Really for us, this is compounded by 2 components. The lower for longer. I mean, this downturn's been going on for a long time. The other thing that's compounded the increase on the orphan industry is the Supreme Court decision that came out here related to Redwater Energy. So that was about a 2.5 year process where receivers were able to disclaim assets when they were in receivership. So there was a lot of sites being orphaned because the receiver would say, well, we can't sell it, we're just going to give it to the Orphan Well Association. So that is no longer the process. But as I'll get into a little bit later, we're still dealing with impacts post the Supreme Court decision, which obviously there's a lot of issues around too. So this chart basically shows how our inventory is growing. The light blue bar is new orphans that have come in within that fiscal. And so our fiscal goes from April 1st to March 31st. So in 2012, the April 1 to March 31. The dark blue bar is how many wells that we abandoned in that fiscal year. And the green line is our opening inventory on April 1st of that year. So in 2012, we had 14 wells left to abandon. We got a lot of new orphans that year. We got 74 orphans. And so our opening inventory the following year was 74. So you can see that up until 2014, had a fairly small inventory. Beginning of that fiscal, we had 162 wells. And this is where we started to see some of the impacts of the commodity prices. So in 2014, we had about 600 new orphans being designated, and it was a dramatic increase. You can see that our opening inventory the following year was up to 705. We ramped up our plans. We planned to abandon close to 200 wells, and between 2015, that sort of curve had flattened out a little bit. Then moving into 2016, we had 855 new wells coming in. So again, we increased our planned to start doing more abandonments, and 2017 leveled it out a little bit, but still had about 650 new wells coming in. In 2018, this is where we got some of the provincial loan money, and so again, we started to ramp up our plans a little bit more. We were targeting to do 600 abandonments. We ended up doing just shy of 800 that year, so we thought we were making some good progress there. But we got over 2,100 new wells that year, large percentage of them coming from Lexington. So we started this fiscal a little over 3,100 wells. Our plan is to, again, do in the 700 range well abandonments. We're well on track for meeting those goals. Unfortunately, we have gotten about 380 new wells already since April 1st. Just got another notice actually today of another 160 that are probably going to be coming over. So, we really don't know where that is going. But I think everything that we're able to see right now is that commodity prices are still going to stay depressed, especially on the gas side. And after probably the winter, we might see more orphans being coming. So again, we're not out of the situation yet, and we probably are going to see an increase after this year as well. So this is our map of our inventory right now. The blue dots on the map are wells that still need to be decommissioned and reclaimed. And the dots in green are just sites that have been fully decommissioned and are ready for reclamation. So you can see we're getting close to 6,000 sites that we're dealing with across Alberta. So it's fairly large. And it doesn't include any of the ones that I mentioned that are not orphaned, but with defunct companies that are with WIP. So there's still a lot more work that is going on related to these defunct companies. On the funding side, as I mentioned, we are funded by an annual orphan levy. When you look at the contribution to date, since inception, $374 million. This is money that's being provided by active companies for other companies that have gone bankrupt. It's quite a lot of money that the industry has provided to make sure that the government and the citizens out there are not being impacted by other companies' operations, and very unique to the oil and gas industry and to Canada in general. There was a previous grant of $30 million in 2009 that came from the provincial government. And there was also a loan that was provided in 2017 of $235 million. I have underlined that as a loan. Again, I do speak to people a lot and they say, well, the government gave you all this money. It's like, well, no. We received it, but we're repaying it by the annual levy. So it's been able to increase the pace of our decommissioning and reclamation activities, but this is not government money. It was facilitated by a federal grant to the provincial government to deal with the interest. So there was some government money in there, but that's federal money. So the levy for 2019, it's $60 million, and we have received most of that levy for this year. The levy for next year has been approved from CAP and EPAC's perspective back to the AER of $65 million. And the proposed levy for 2021 would be $70 million. As many of you know, each company pays a proportionate share of the levy as based on their provincial liabilities. So each company within the LMR program, each site's given an abandonment reclamation cost. When you aggregate all those, that's the provincial liability, and then the company has their own. So if you have 5% of the provincial liability, you pay 5% of the levy. So those are calculated through Directives 6, 11, and 75. Now, there's also another orphan program in there that deals with large facilities. So large facilities, there's about 100 of them in the province, largely in-situ plants, sulfur recovery plants, straddle plants. Those are not within the Orphan Well program. They're separate. Part of the reason that they've been separate is there's never been a failure of a large facility until now. So now we are getting to the point where there's at least 2 that are going to have to be funded. And so that may come into effect next year. We're still waiting to get clarification on that. So on the expenditure side, here's our budgets from 2017 and forecasted out to 2021. That orange at the top is actually our loan repayments. So that's our overall budget, but the numbers in black are actually our expenditures. So it includes well abandonment, site reclamation, decommissioning, pipeline abandonments, other components, and working interest claims. So those working interest claims are the ones that I said that we basically deal with the WIPs that do work on behalf of defunct companies. So those are our budgets. For this year, we are forecasting that we're going to pay out about $15 million in working interest claims. We might actually be over that. We're getting close to the halfway mark, and we are halfway through our budget. So we're thinking that that's going to be maybe a little bit more than we forecast. Loan repayments for next year are going to be up to $30 million, and it goes up to 2026. So we're going to be starting to see more and more money going back to the provincial government to cover the loan, and less money being spent on our operations. Now, again, this is sort of something we've been talking about with the government. Go back to that slide showing the inventory. When we started this loan program, we thought we were going to bend that curve, and it's actually not even flat, and it's going up. So trying to figure out how we can deal with these sites. So something of interest for this group, probably around access. How do we get access to these sites? So obviously, as a company is going into bankruptcy, they are starting to cut back costs anywhere they can, right? And a lot of times, landowners are the ones that get the brunt of that. So a lot of times, when we're dealing with these defunct companies, surface rent is owed. Also, while they're cutting back costs and what they're spending, they can also let the condition of the site go. And so there's also some impacts that landowners can feel from that. So we do not pay any back rent. Landowners must apply to the Surface Rights Board. Now, for your interest here, the Surface Rights Board, any payments that they do provide to landowners comes out of provincial general revenues. So as taxpayers, we're all paying for these companies, at least for the Surface Rights Board. The Surface Rights Board, as many of you know, is not just sort of a place that the landowners send their request in and get any amount back. It is a quasi-judicial process. And so there is quite a lot of information that landowners need to apply to be able to get that information, to get the rent that they are owed. But they are getting that money. The Surface Rights Board has been getting a large backlog, and they have been putting more resources to it, but they're definitely seeing that same increase in claims and feeling some impacts as well. So as I said at the beginning of the presentation, we are a delegated authority of the Energy Regulator. So obviously the regulator has legal access under the legislation. So there's 2 components, one on the decommissioning side, Section 101 of the Oil and Gas Conservation Act, and under the APIA, you've got Section 250 that has the right of entry. So whenever a site is actually issued for reclamation, we actually get an EPO as well. So there's 2 components in which we have legal access. I would say, though, is that overall we do have a positive relationship with landowners, maybe not to begin with. I mean, it takes a little bit of explaining, letting them know what our role is, letting them know that we're not going to be paying them any rent, showing them how they can get their money from Surface Rights Board, explaining how it all works. If need be, we could get a court order to go on, but within our overall program, there's about 15 or 20 landowners that are restricting our access right now. These are sites that are not really high risk either, so we don't need to force our way on. We've got lots and lots of sites to go elsewhere and do our work. And part of what we explain to landowners too is, if you are restricting our access, we are required to let Surface Rights Board know. So, your future payments might be impacted by doing this. And once we explain that and help them through the process, it usually does help them understand and give us the access that we need. So looking back into our last fiscal, talking about some of the accomplishments that we were able to do there. As I mentioned, we did almost 800 wells. I kind of wish we would have gotten that last one to say we did 800. We did another 340 downhole abandonments. For this year, we've cut and capped just shy of 100. We got about another 200 that ready to cut and cap. So sort of within the realm of end of life work, this would put us in the top 3 in Western Canada, to give you a scale of our operation here. On the metrics side, I know this is something you'll see in the paper about what liability is and within the province. We try to stay out of it because we don't calculate liability, but we are providing the numbers that we're seeing on the work that we do. So we compare ourselves on the Directive 11 side, on the abandonment component. We're at 64% of Directive 11. These are the area-based closure programs that we're undertaking. A lot of other companies are looking at doing, and we are getting a lot of success doing area-based closure. So there's a couple components that we do get those savings from. One, obviously, we have a scale of a certain size of an operation where we can negotiate rates that are favorable. The biggest component, though, we have is that we are using the same crews in the same areas that are doing, very similar assets. So they were drilled and constructed at the same time, they operated the same, and they had a lot of the same operators through their history. And so the problems that we run into tend to be the same on various wells. So once you kind of solve that problem on 1 or 2 wells, you can replicate it. You're not learning every time. So we're getting a lot of savings on this. So on the average side is $34,000. Now, people always ask about, what does it cost? It's like, well, it really depends on which wells you're doing, right? We have wells that we do, lots of them that are less than $10,000 per well. We also did some critical sour wells that were south of Calgary. Some of them were $800,000. So, if I did all $800,000 wells, well, that would be my average. And if I did all $10,000 wells, that would be my average. But we do try to do all of them and really look at risk and then bundling them within that area-based closure. But we do compare to Directive 11, and I do think that we can get in sort of that realm. Also, to talk about the area-based closure thing, one of the things that we track is how the producers are doing when they're doing these one-offs on these working interest claims that we do. So we see the cost that they have, and we also track on that. The industry average on these one-offs is basically double. So they're doing it 135% of Directive 11. So you can see the value of doing it with an area-based closure program. We also did a lot of reclamation work. We were trying to move a lot of sites through our inventory, so a large focus on our phase 1s. We also did a lot of phase 2s and did about 238 sites that got fully reclaimed. So we're expecting our numbers this year to start increasing a little bit more. This is reclamations is a phased program, and we're expecting this to start increasing. For this year, we have a corporate focus largely on 3 areas. One is our safely delivering of results. Our TRIF is 0, so we'll just give a little knock on wood for that. So we're about a quarter way through our budget, and so we're planning to be on target for that still. Obviously, we're still focusing on making sure our cost performance is there. So really, we're focusing on downhole, pipeline abandonment, and decommissioning, and surface reclamation within our corporate goals. Also, what we're trying to do is move sites from inactive to fully reclaimed. So trying to get a big number through that area as well. So some of the changes that we're contemplating, we are looking at a lot of different things. A lot of things that we hear from industry, from CAP and EPAC, from AER. There's lots of good ideas about how we can do things differently. As you go back into 2012, again, 14 wells, that was a different scope than when you're dealing with, over 3,000 wells. Unfortunately, though, we cannot make change. We cannot just change our mandate. We can't change how our scope is set up because we're within legislation. So we have provided the government with some ideas that we'd like to see legislative changes. And I do think that everybody is on board, whether it's CAP, EPAC, the AER, and the government, everyone's on board. Unfortunately, though, it requires legislative change. So that is not always an easy thing to do. There might be some other options that we can still get change, but it might be a little bit more time consuming than we want, at least while we're still in this. The big thing that we're looking at though is we want to allow the flexibility to work on non-orphan sites. So first of all would be sites that are with a defunct company, but there's still a working interest participant involved. So we're calling those near orphans, working on near orphan sites. So there's a lot of sites that we deal with where we're abandoning 2 wells on the same quarter, and there's 2 wells that someone else has got to come. And so we're like, well, we should just be able to go over there and do those same ones, and then just charge the working interest participant for whatever their portion of the costs are. Also, it's going to save industry money because, you know, if you look at those 2 differences in the cost, we're about half of what industry is, at least on the one-offs. So we could save industry a lot of money. We're also contemplating about, you know, how can we allow non-orphan sites to be part of the program too. So if we're in an area doing, you know, 200 well program and someone's got 1 or 2 wells in that area, we could do that well as basically a contractor on their behalf and do that, and then save money as well. Another thing that we've been asking about is through the regulator directed transfer process, which is how sites go from our orphan inventory back to an active producer, is we want to make it easier for companies to take those assets from defunct companies. So once it's designated as an orphan, it kind of severs it from the mineral and surface leases. And so taking it, you have to go reacquire mineral and you have to go reacquire the surface. So again, it makes it difficult, and we want to make it easier. And we're also looking at alternative closures besides just decommissioning and reclaiming wells. This is kind of more of a little bit of a fringe area, I think. You know, there's some geothermal options out there, but I don't think they're going to be able to deal with, you know, 3,000 sites across the province. There might be a handful, but looking at some options that would be able to get that in there. So there's obviously a lot of issues out here still too that we're dealing with, and it could impact the Orphan Well Association. The big one here is the results of the successful appeal at the Redwater Energy decision from the Supreme Court. So one of the things we're still trying to grapple with is, you know, how are we going to manage future insolvencies? We are hearing that a lot of the secured creditors are looking at this as well, and there's still some sort of trying to figure it out. But most secured creditors, when they do the review on the balance sheet, they know that they're not going to be getting anything out of it. Very seldomly. I mean, you have to be a fairly profitable company. You probably wouldn't be going into receivership to begin with. But our priorities of end of life are ahead of secured creditors. So for the example of Trident Exploration, secured creditors in that case did not want to put the company into receivership. They were not going to get anything out of it, so they were not going to pay for receivership. So Trident's that one example that we took the unprecedented step of actually petitioning them into receivership, and PwC is the receiver on that file. So this is one where we're trying to figure out how we can work with receivers through this process. And again, when the legislation was drafted 20 years ago, no one thought that we would have to be involved in receiverships. So it's a little bit of a thing about, you know, how can we deal with these if it's not within our mandate? The problem though is if we don't do it, who is going to do it? You know, if we wouldn't have been involved with that, there was 4,400 sites from Trident that would have just came over to the Orphan Well Association probably within a month's time. You know, more than a doubling of our inventory. So I think we do need to be involved, but we're trying to find out how we can be involved and how much latitude we can have. And I think this is part of the thing is that we haven't really seen the same number of insolvencies coming in. Part of that being too is that prior to the Supreme Court decision, secured creditors could actually get a bump on the money that they may have gotten. So it's an interesting perspective. The other one, the big one that's out there is Sequoia Resources and Perpetual Energy. So there's an application to have the transaction set aside. So that means that Perpetual sold a whole bunch of assets to a predecessor of Sequoia. Sequoia since went bankrupt, and the trustee is looking at having that whole transaction set aside. So I mean, all those assets that were sold to Sequoia would actually be moved back into Perpetual. So there's about 1,800 wells in that transaction. So it's a big number, regardless of which side you're up. So in August 15th, there was a decision. Perpetual had to put an application to have the whole proceeding set aside. The judge did not rule that was going to happen. The case personally against Sue Riddell Rose was dismissed, but the case against Perpetual of the transaction side is moving ahead. Now we're in the appeal process. So both Perpetual and PwC as the trustee has appealed the sides that they lost. So we're probably waiting until probably Q1 or Q2 before the appeal is going to be decided. Unless it's all dismissed, it's going to go to trial. So realistically, if you've got assets with Sequoia, you're probably looking maybe 2 to 3 years out here. It's a long process. We're hoping that maybe it can be expedited a little bit, but right now it doesn't look like that'll be the case. As I mentioned, we are looking at some of these regulatory changes to our scope and mandate. That obviously would have a big impact to us. We've made our long laundry list to the government. Realistically, we're probably not going to get everything we ask for, but it obviously will change how we do our business, depending on what we get. And I mentioned as well, large facilities. So right now there's 2 that have gone into that failure, and there's no funding for large facilities. Mazeppa gas plant is one that's 100%, so that likely would be coming to us. It still hasn't been decided, but that is obviously a big project in and of itself. We would be the biggest that we've ever done as a single site. So in summary, we're a delegated authority of the Energy Regulator, but we're not the Energy Regulator, we're independent. Our primary duties are to decommission and reclaim orphan properties and to deal with the reimbursement claims for working participants related to the sites on those default operators. And we're funded by the oil and gas industry within Alberta, which includes the 2017 loan of $235 million. And we're also going through a period of significant change and improvement. I left the website on there. We have put up our annual report if you're interested in seeing it. And I think we'll have lots of time for questions. So I mean, the large facility orphan program is separate from the current orphan program. And there's no plans to amalgamate them. So the levying within the orphan levy and the large facility will be 2 separate levies. And the ones that are in the large facility is you have to have a facility in the large facility program to get a levy. Now, the legislation needs to be enacted, and so there's the components to get it done, but that would be probably, it's either going to be in the levy would come out in April of next year or maybe the year after. It kind of depends on what happens with that component. But then we run this, so the thing that we have is that we run them as 2 separate programs, like they're separate within the legislation. And then sort of some of the components that we manage from a administration component, like our office and all the computer programs that we need. Each portion of those levies would pay a percentage based on probably the expenditures. Yeah, I mean, we do provide a lot of that feedback to the press when they're asking those type of questions. I mean, obviously, when it's an op-ed, it's kind of tough to comment on it, right? And I mean, people confuse a lot of numbers, whether it's provincial liability or orphan liability, because the orphan liability is not anywhere near they talk about. I've seen some numbers that are multi-billions, right? The numbers they're talking about are like the end of the industry, which I guess you could say in theory, if the industry just stopped today, yeah, there'd be a multi-billion-dollar liability that would go to somebody, and the industry wouldn't have the money. But I think everyone's been pretty clear, making sure that the public knows it's not theirs and it's not within it, right? But I mean, there's obviously, and Dr. Swan's part of that group that's also doing the Alberta Liabilities Disclosure Project. So they've been pushing it quite a bit on that side. So we are trying to do more outreach. We're looking internally right now about how we can communicate the good things that we're doing and also making sure that people understand that it's not the industry. But I would say it's the same thing like a lot of things. Try to convince people out in Eastern Canada that pipeline is a good thing. It's like, yeah, we can communicate, but if no one's listening, it is difficult, right? But we are looking at trying to ramp that up and trying to improve our communication on it. But it's difficult. Yeah, so it's not under the levy, so there's actually an application process. You have to go through the AER. On our website, we do have the information on all the steps that are involved with it. But it's basically, all the information gets submitted to the AER, and it bounces back between us and the AER. The AER has got to go through a whole bunch of review process to make sure that the work interest is accurate. We've got to review it to make sure that all the costs are appropriate. It's not like sort of like dealing with a partner where you sort of just send a check back to, right? Our timeline is about 90 days from point of submission, and it is all within the website. We'll also, if you guys don't know, is we actually do request AFEs to come in as well. It's not a required process, but it will make your claim be processed faster. So the email address is afe@orphanwell.ca. The AER is going to be putting that on all future abandonment orders as well, so that people realize that. But both of those pieces of information are on our website as well. And again, just a reminder, you actually need to have finished the abandonment, so it needs to be reported through DDS as a cap, and you have to have a reclamation certificate issued. We do communicate with both BC and Saskatchewan. Our programs are dramatically larger than theirs are. We sort of share what we are doing. We have thought about that idea about having a Western Canadian type Orphan Well Association. Again, though, each province has their Orphan Well Association equivalent in legislation, right? And so BC and Saskatchewan actually do them through their government employees. But we have thought about having something bigger, but if you think our small legislative changes are difficult just for us to do in Alberta, doing a Western Canada one would be difficult. But we have thought about that, and we're trying to figure out ways to maybe navigate that too. Yeah, it is. So the AER has that information, but working interest doesn't have to be updated all the time too, right? So really when the operator changes, that's when you're required to change the working interest, if I got it correct. But if you sell a minor interest to another party, you're not required to do that updating. So when the AER sends out an abandonment order and lists all the working interest parties, they actually have a bunch of back and forth too to confirm what that is. But they've got access to it somewhere. And sometimes I actually have to see like the purchase and sale agreements for some of the assets. So it can be a difficult thing, and we have no visibility to it. You're not supposed to be restricted access, but the difficult thing from an operator standpoint is usually, historically, you would have gotten an order saying you got 90 days to do the work. The AER has provided a little more flexibility on that standpoint, just based on the size of the problem. But I know that there's a large range, right? I know some companies have gone and greased the wheels a little bit, not got a new surface agreement, but provided some payment so they can get in there and do the work. But it's not required. But again, it's difficult because as a company, you guys have timelines that you need to meet where we don't necessarily have time frames, right? So if someone says they're restricting our access, we then move on. Now, at the end of the day, the Surface Rights Board should know if you've given money to a landowner, because then they would reduce their payment to them, right? So the landowner shouldn't be getting double payment, basically, right? So it's you should be able to get it the same way, but I will say that it's much more difficult for an operator to come and do it, right? I guess part of the problem that we've been talking about with the government too is, from a landowner's perspective, they really do not understand as a community what a working participant is, right? Like I said, we actually have one landowner on one quarter where we got 4 wells with a defunct company, 2 of which are with us, 2 of which are with a WIP. And trying to explain to the landowner why we're only doing 2 of his wells when the sign on the gate says one company, it's confusing, right? So it can be difficult to explain them. And again, we get a little bit more latitude, I think, from landowners too, being the Orphan Well Association, opposed to, if you're a large producer. I think some of those landowners might think, well, just pay me. I don't care. Just pay me, right? So, but you can push back on it. So there's a couple different points of contact that we have. When a site is designated as an orphan, we get a letter from the AER that says, this site has been designated an orphan. That's the extent of the information that we get. And so we need to then find out who the landowner is, right? And we need to make contact with that landowner. We need to let them know the site's been designated as an orphan. We need to let them know about the work that we're going to be doing. And so at that initial stage, we do use land agents to make sure that they understand that. Then there's a whole bunch of touch points after that as well. So when we're coming out there to do the downhole component, our plant contractor reaches out to the landowner. When we do our phase one, the environmental consultant will reach out to the landowner. But the initial one is done by a land agent. We have seen tremendous increase in the inventory. Our expenditures have bumped up. You know, a couple of years ago it was 15 million, then 30 million, 45 to 100, right? As many as you know, there's lots of people who are looking for jobs right now. Like finding people to work is not a problem. We get a lot of calls from people actually, you know, still looking for work. A lot of service companies looking for work. So we mean that manpower side is not actually that difficult. The dealing with the inventory, we do prioritize and do risk ranking, and most of the sites that we deal with are not high risk from an H2S perspective. Most of them are fairly benign, and they can be, once they're suspended, you know, changed and locked, they can sit in that status without causing an environmental impact for 15 or 20 years. So there's not an urgency. I mean, obviously we want to see that curve being bent. We don't want to leave it out there. But as this money comes from industry too, you know, the board would go back and say, well, we can't ask for, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars this year from a levy and expect companies to pay for it. You know, the orphan levy, all things being equal here, is essentially a tax on industry, right? So it just can't be whatever is needed to deal with it, and this problem can be dealt with over a longer term. So right now, really the expenditures that we're doing on a year, so if we're spending, say, 77 million in the field this year, over the whole year, that is not a major type project. Once you've got everything set up and running. So, I mean, we've staffed up over the last 2 years. We kind of see it being flat going forward, and that's what we're talking about with the government, is that we don't want to have these big bumps in our budget. We want to keep it level. But really right now, it seems very steady. So it was a lot of work getting it bumped up, I'll tell you that. You know, give you sort of a sense is we had such little work that we were doing all our invoicing and payment by hand. So paper invoices. So transitioning to you know, a program that does automatic electronic invoicing. I mean, it seems all very simple now that it's up and running, but transitioning is difficult. Transitioning our financial management software, changing our databases, all these things need to be changed on top of, you know, lots of other changes. So lots of work that went into that for the whole team, but now we've kind of moved forward and we are you know, more steady now. I would say that it's a fairly small percentage right now, in that while we were going through the impacts of the sort of initial Redwater decision to the Supreme Court one, the receivers were trying to sell good assets, and they were, and then the stuff that they couldn't sell was coming to us. Now, there was a number of probably wells within there that someone was willing to take on the liabilities, but it would be a $1 deal. And so the receiver would look at those and say, wow, that's going to cost me money to do a $1 deal, and I don't care. I just want to make money, right? I want to make most money for the secured creditors. And so there was some $1 deals that didn't happen because of that. So there's a number there, but as a percentage, it'd be on the smaller side. Again, part of that's also commodity price driven too, right? I mean, when we look at some of these assets that have come in, I mean, we kind of look at them and say, you know, if we could put these into, you know, suspension mode for 5 years, they could be good assets when things pick up. Unfortunately, within our mandate, it says you can only spend money on this, of which one of those things does not say suspend and wait until things improve. It's only to go in and do it. So that's part of what we were talking about with the government too, is we need some more options around this. Now, one of the things that we are looking at within this going forward here too is as long as assets are within receivership, those mineral and surface agreements are tied as long as they're maintained. So there's some nice things about assets being in receivership, right? So the Trident receivership, there's been no assets that have actually been disclaimed or discharged in that, and part of that is trying to make sure that there's more flexibility within it. So I think the PwC would be looking at more deals within that, the new post-Redwater world than how it was dealt with beforehand. Now, we also say within the RDT process, we do have companies that want to come and look at assets. We do a handful of transfers every year, but it's relative to doing, say, 800 abandonments, we're probably looking at 10 to 15 wells being transferred. We compare to Directive 11 on the downhole side. We do not compare it on the reclamation side. As many as you'll know, that the numbers within the D11 haven't been updated in a long time, and the reclamation ones do not include all the necessary components like on the remediation side. So we actually, on our benchmarking side, we have access to a database that CAP created to help look at all of the costs that we're benchmarking on the remediation, reclamation, and pipeline decommissioning side to that CAP database.